Okay. My presentation topic is magnetic field and types of magnetism. This is an overview of all the points that I'm going to be discussing about. Starting with the history of magnetic field. The research of magnetic fields began in 1269 when French scholar Petrus mapped out the magnetic field on the surface of a spherical magnet using iron needles. The resulting field lines crossed at 2 points, which he named poles, in analogy to Earth's poles. 3 centuries later, William Gilbert explicitly stated that the Earth is a magnet. In 1785, Coulomb experimentally verified that the magnetic poles attract and repel according to an inverse square law. In 1820, Ørsted demonstrated that a current-carrying wire is surrounded by a circular magnetic field. Michael Faraday, in 1831, discovered electromagnetic induction when he found that a changing magnetic field generates an encircling electric field. Finally, between 1861 and 1865, Maxwell developed and published his equations, which explained and united all of classical and electricity and magnetism. Magnetic field. So it is basically the three-dimensional space that surrounds a magnet or a current-carrying conductor in which its magnetic effect can be experienced. So shown here is a bar magnet and the magnetic field of it. So the magnetic field is represented by lines of force which are continuous, and we see that the lines of force start from the North Pole and they end on the South Pole. Now this direction is taken purely by convention. We also see that the magnetic field lines are crowded or dense near the poles and they're further apart away from the poles. So this means that the magnetic field is stronger near the poles and the magnetic field is weak here. The magnetic lines of force do not cross. This means that the magnetic field is unique at any point. The total number of lines that cross a given area is known as a magnetic flux. Its SI unit is Weber. Sources of magnetic field. So this is the first source, which is the bar magnet, and we already saw the magnetic field due to a bar magnet in the previous slide. I just like to add here that the lines of force form closed continuous loops, whereas the lines of force also pass through the material. So strictly speaking, the magnetic field is the strongest inside the material. But externally, the magnetic field is strongest near the poles. Second is a solenoid. A solenoid is a tightly wound helical coil of wire whose diameter is very small compared to its length. And the solenoid is connected to an external supply, which is carrying current. So the magnetic field due to the solenoid inside the core of the solenoid is essentially uniform, and it is directed along the axis of the solenoid. The magnetic field outside the solenoid is much weaker. Now, if I is the current that flows through this wire and N is the number of turns per meter, then we have the magnetic field within the solenoid given by this equation. B is equal to mu naught Ni, where mu naught is the absolute permeability of free space. Third is the current in wire. So here we have a long wire carrying current which flows in this direction, and the magnetic field due to it forms concentric circles around the wire. The direction of the magnetic field is given by the right-hand thumb rule, which states that if you carry a current-carrying conductor in your right hand and your thumb is pointing in the direction of the current, then the direction of the magnetic field is given by the direction in which your fingers would curl. Fourth is the current loop. So here we have a loop carrying current, and we see that every part of the loop is contributing to the magnetic field in the same direction inside the loop. And we also see that the field lines inside the loop are concentrated, and outside the loop, they are further apart. So when we stack several such loops together, we get a solenoid. Finally, we have the Earth's magnetic field or the geomagnetic field. So the value of the magnitude of the magnetic field on the surface of the Earth varies from 0.3 to 0.6 Gauss. The geomagnetic field generation is attributed to the dynamo theory, which was proposed by Walter Althusser. According to this theory, convection drives the outer core fluid, which circulates relative to the Earth. Now, this fluid consists of electrically conducting material. So if by some chance it acquires a charge, say by friction between the layers, then we have an effective current loop. So the magnetic field generated by this current loop extends over the entire planet. Now, there are many mechanisms and theories that show the generation of geomagnetic field, but the most seriously considered one is the dynamo theory. Let's talk about the relationship between V, H, and M. So here we have a solenoid connected to the DC supply and it is carrying current, and we have a demagnetized iron bar inside the solenoid. So we see that when this magnetizing current magnetizes the iron bar, the field outside the solenoid is now much stronger compared to what it was in the case of no iron bar. So this is basically because we have the field of the solenoid. We also have an external field of the magnetized iron bar. So this additive field, that is a combination of these two fields, is known as the magnetic flux density or magnetic induction, and it is represented by symbol B. It is the sum of the applied field H and the external field of the now magnetized iron bar. M represents the magnetization, which is the induced magnetic moment per unit volume. So this equation is in SI units. It is B is equal to mu naught H plus M. H and M have units ampere per meter. B is in Tesla and mu naught is in Tesla meters per ampere. Coming to different types of magnetism. So we start with diamagnetism. A diamagnetic material has no unpaired electrons in its atoms. Therefore, the net magnetic moment is zero. In case of an applied external field, the induced EMF in each atom increases. Therefore, the speeds of electrons revolving in one direction is greater than the speeds of the electrons revolving in the other direction. This results in a net magnetic moment in a direction opposite to that of the applied field. This negative magnetic effect is known as diamagnetism. So diamagnetic materials weakly repel the external magnetic field. The magnetic susceptibility, which is the measure of how much a material becomes magnetized in the presence of an external field, is negative. And it is only for diamagnetism that chi-m is independent of temperature. A magnetic permeability is the measure of the influence of the material on the magnetic flux in the region it occupies. So magnetic relative permeability is less than 1. This means that the permeability of diamagnetic materials is less than the permeability of free space. So this is the diamagnetic material, and we see that the magnetic flux lines are pushed further apart. So this decreases the magnetic flux density. Examples of diamagnetic materials are cadmium, copper, and silver, and they find their applications in superconductors, which are used in MRI systems. Paramagnetism. The spin and orbital moments of the atoms in paramagnetic materials are aligned in such a way that each atom possesses a permanent magnetic dipole moment, as shown here. But due to thermal vibrations, these moments are randomly oriented. So one is oriented like this, one is oriented like this, one is oriented like this. So all these orientations cancel each other out, and we have no net magnetic moment. Now, when an applied magnetic field is present, the magnetic moments align in a direction parallel to the applied field. So the relative permeability is more than 1, which means that the paramagnets concentrate the magnetic flux lines by a factor of more than 1. The susceptibility is positive and it has a small value. And when this field is removed, so the thermal vibrations come into play and randomization occurs, so the material gets demagnetized. This is a variation of susceptibility with temperature in kelvins and is given by this relation, chi-m is equal to Cp upon T, where Cp is Curie's constant and it is material specific. So we see that the susceptibility varies inversely with temperature. Since as the temperature increases, thermal vibrations increase, and therefore the randomization of alignment occurs and the material is demagnetized. Examples of paramagnets are oxygen, aluminum, and calcium. Paramagnets find their applications in the form of temporary magnets, which are used in electric canes to lift magnetic materials, as we all know. Ferromagnetism. Ferromagnetism is a property which is attributed to two quantum mechanical effects, namely spin and Pauli exclusion principle. Let's talk about spin. We know that the intrinsic spin angular momentum of an electron has a magnetic dipole moment associated with it. This dipole moment creates a dipole field. So the atoms in a ferromagnetic sample have all unpaired electrons. All the atoms have unpaired electrons. So they have a net magnetic moment. Now we saw that in paramagnetism, when an applied field was present, the moments aligned in a direction parallel to the field. In ferromagnetism, however, these dipoles or spins align spontaneously. This is a purely quantum mechanical effect. It is due to the exchange interaction, which is related to the Pauli exclusion principle. Now, the Pauli exclusion principle states that two electrons in the same spin state cannot be in the same spatial state. That is, two electrons which have parallel spins cannot occupy the same orbital. So if you have two adjacent atoms and the orbitals are overlapping, and the unpaired electrons in the orbitals, if they have parallel spins, then we see that the electric charge distribution in space is further apart than if the electrons had anti-parallel spins. So the electrostatic energy for parallel spin state is reduced compared to the electrostatic energy for the anti-parallel spin state. So naturally, the parallel spin state is the most stable one. This difference in energy is known as exchange energy, and it is orders of magnitude greater than the energy difference associated with the magnetic dipole-dipole interaction. For example, in iron, which is a ferromagnet, the exchange force is 1,000 times greater than the magnetic dipole interaction. But this exchange force is short range. So over a long range, say many atoms, the tendency of the magnetic dipoles to align in opposite direction wins out. Also, if all of these dipoles were aligned in a parallel direction, a large magnetic field would extend in the space around this sample. So it would contain a lot of magnetostatic energy. And to reduce this, the sample splits into domains which have spins in different directions. These domains are called ferromagnetic domains. And we see that in each domain, the spin is in one direction, but in different domains, the spins are in different directions. So the material has no net large-scale magnetic field. In the presence of an applied magnetic field, the domain which has spins parallel to the field grow at the expense of less favorably oriented domains. Now, domain growth by wall movement, these are the walls of the domains. So domain growth by wall movement takes place before domain rotation. This is because this requires lesser energy. And once this domain growth is completed and the applied field is increased, domain rotation takes place. When the applied field is removed, we see that the ferromagnetic sample retains some amount of magnetization, and some amount of magnetization may be lost. And this is because the domains have a tendency to rotate back to the original alignment. This is a hysteresis loop. It is basically a closed curve, as you can see here, and it shows the variation of flux density B versus magnetizing force or applied field H. So as the applied field is increased, the flux density increases till it reaches the value B max. This is known as a saturation magnetization. Beyond this, if the applied field is further increased, there is no increase in flux density. It remains constant. Now, if the applied field is decreased, the flux density also decreases. At zero applied field, when the applied field is completely removed, the flux density does not become zero. That is, the ferromagnetic sample has retained some amount of magnetization. This point is called the point of retentivity. Now, if the applied field is increased in the opposite direction, we observe that the flux density also increases in the opposite direction, the flux density decreases further, and finally it becomes zero at this point called the point of coercivity. Now, if the magnetizing force or applied field is further increased in the opposite direction, we observe that the flux density slowly starts increasing in the opposite direction till finally it saturates at this value called minus B max. Again, we reverse the direction of the applied field or the magnetizing force, and we observe that the flux density goes on decreasing because it's a negative value, and we are decreasing the magnetizing force negatively till the magnetizing force becomes zero, but the ferromagnetic sample again has retained negative amount of magnetization, minus Br. Again, we further increase it in the same direction, and we observe that we again get a point of coercivity where the flux density is now zero. And again, it goes on increasing with the increasing field till it saturates again. So this way the loop is complete, this loop. Okay. So we saw that the exchange forces are very strong, but eventually thermal energy overcomes this exchange force, and this happens at a temperature called Curie temperature. So the Curie temperature is related to the susceptibility of ferromagnetic materials by this relation, which is the Curie-Weiss law. And we see that below the Curie temperature, the ferromagnet is ordered. However, above the Curie temperature, disordering occurs and ferromagnetic material becomes paramagnetic. So we saw the examples of ferromagnets are like iron, nickel, and cobalt, and they're used to make electromagnets. They're also used in magnet-based memory devices such as magnetic drives and magnetic tapes and magnetic hard drives. Sorry. Antiferromagnetism. In antiferromagnetism, we have an anti-parallel spin alignment in two interpenetrating substructures. So this is one substructure and this is the other substructure. And you can see that the spins are aligned in anti-parallel arrangement. So there is no overall bulk spontaneous magnetization. So this anti-parallel alignment is due to the superexchange phenomena of spin energy within the material. I'm going to explain it here. So we have manganese oxide, which is an ionic compound, and it has linear chains of Mn2 plus and O2 minus ions. So Mn2 plus and O2 minus ions have filled electron shells. The hybridization takes place by donation of electrons from the O2 minus ions to the open orbitals of the Mn2 plus ions. So the Mn2 plus ion orbitals, which have spin-up electrons, receive a downspin electron from the O2 minus ion. This leaves an upspin electron in the O2 minus p orbital. So this is donated to the next Mn2 plus ion in chain to complete the bond. However, this donation takes place only if the electrons in the Mn2 plus d orbital have downspin. So the spins are flipped. So we see that the Mn2 plus ions are arranged in an anti-parallel spin alignment within the crystalline structure. So this is the variation of susceptibility with absolute value of temperature in Kelvin. We see that susceptibility increases inversely with temperature above a point called the Néel temperature, and it decreases inversely with temperature below the Néel temperature. So because of this, the theta becomes negative, and the Curie-Weiss law is modified in this way. So above the Néel temperature, the antiferromagnetic material becomes paramagnetic, and below the Néel temperature, the antiferromagnetic material is ordered. Examples of antiferromagnets are chromium and manganese, and they could be used in magnetoresistive random access memory based on antiferromagnetism. Ferrimagnetism. As we saw in the previous slide, that in ionic compounds such as oxides, more complex forms of magnetic ordering occur due to the crystal structure. Another such type is ferrimagnetism. So in ferrimagnetism, these are the spin orientations of a ferrimagnetic oxide, and the magnetic structure is shown here. It consists of two sublattices. So this is one sublattice, and this is the other sublattice. Again, the first sublattice and the other. So these two sublattices are separated by oxygen anions, and the exchange interaction takes the exchange interaction is mediated by these oxygen anions. We see that the first sublattice has spins in one direction, whereas the second sublattice has spins in the other direction, and these spins are unequal in magnitude. Therefore, magnetic materials have a net magnetic moment. Like we saw in ferromagnets, ferrimagnetic materials also hold spontaneous magnetization below a temperature called the Curie temperature. So below the Curie temperature, the ferrimagnetic materials are ordered, and above the Curie temperature, disordering occurs, and the ferrimagnetic material becomes paramagnetic. There is, however, a temperature below the Curie temperature known as the magnetization compensation point, at which the magnetic moments which were aligned in the opposite directions, they become equal. So the sample has no net magnetic moment. So we see that this graph is divided into three regions. The first region is below the magnetization compensation point, where the ferrimagnetic material is ordered. The second region corresponds to the magnetization compensation point, where the sample has no net magnetic moment. And the third region corresponds to the region above the Curie temperature, where the sample becomes paramagnetic. So the oldest known magnetic substance, magnetite, is a ferrimagnet. It was used to make the first navigational compass. Examples of ferrimagnets are also yttrium iron garnet, and they find applications in the form of minerals. So in various types of rocks, we have ferrimagnetic minerals, which are used to study the geomagnetic properties of Earth and other planets. Thank you.